got some announcements, if I can just remember them. The first one is we've got a potluck coming up in a couple of weeks. The burger thing, as we call it, right? So be thinking about that. It's an exciting, good time. And as Brent mentioned, and not to make you feel guilty if you didn't show up. Okay, so if you're a lady, you're scot-free on this one. But if you didn't show up to the men's breakfast, man, you missed a good time. And it's actually a pretty good time. And if you didn't make it, we missed you. I guess that's all I got to say about that. There was plenty of food. There's always plenty of food. I don't think we've ever run out, so that's good. And speaking of food, we've got this burger thing coming up, so don't miss it. And it's interesting. There's just something about Christians in general that it seems we like a good potluck. Right? Even in Bible times, right? In the time of Jesus, they were having potlucks. And in fact, Paul had to comment on, you know what, your potlucks are getting out of hand. Right? There were actually people getting drunk at the potluck. Now, granted, that might add some entertaining value, but Paul's like, yeah, that's not the way we need to be doing things. So we don't get drunk at our potlucks. There's an update to Wednesday night live stream. Okay, you ready? So we're not going to be streaming Athey Creek. We're going to listen to Jack Hibbs for a while, stream some Jack Hibbs. So, pardon me?
He's from Chino Hills.
Yeah, Chino Hills. It's kind of a big mover and shaker in the Calvary Chapel movement, so in case you've tracked that before. It seems like there's something else. Oh, there is. So here's something that some of you already know, some of you don't know, and for what it is, Emily has stepped down her position as church secretary. The Lord was kind of leading her to some other ministry things, and she needed more time to kind of focus on herself and her family. So she's no longer the church secretary, and you're like, oh, how are we going to function without a church secretary? Well, a lot like we normally function, kind of chaotically. But we've been doing, and there's been some transition, but we're kind of working through things. If you have questions, just find one of the elders or their spouses. That's how that works. We kind of tapped the spouses to kind of help step up in this transition. Currently, we don't have the desire necessarily to hire a replacement. We're just going to see how it works. So, no, there's no hard feelings at all with Emily stepping down. She's still a part of the family, but she's been real busy. So, in case you were wondering, that's where it is. That's the official statement. There it is. Anyway, oh yeah, and if you have any problems, the one to look for probably be on the speed dials. Ken Plummer 503-330-5081. Yeah, especially if you're mad, that's the one to call. Okay, just kidding. He's not back there, so I can kind of run roughshod. But before we get started, Ron, can you go ahead? Are there any other announcements? No? Okay. Ron, can you put the map up before I get going to, yeah, there you go. Oh, nice. Can you zoom in kind of in the Galilee area there? Okay, that's fine. So if you recall, the last time we were together and studying, we were looking at Jesus, and he had gone up to Tyre and Sidon. Okay, so it was out of Israel proper. And he met with this woman and talked with her, and it sounded kind of rude at first. But we see that Jesus was kind of peeling away some of the religious overtones that she had, and it revealed this pure heart that she had and how she was just pleading to Jesus, stripped away of all her religiosity. We also noted that didn't appear that he went up there for any other reason than to meet with her. And one of the things that happened was, as he was talking with her, he kind of kept up the stereotype that the Jews, if you recall, they called their neighbors, their Gentiles, dogs. And he called her a dog. And she says, oh, okay, I'm a dog. But you know what? The dogs get the crumbs from the master's table, right? And before this whole incident happened, he talked about how the Pharisees, what comes out of the mouth is what defiles a person. Okay, and so he's calling these Pharisees defiled, and then he goes up to a non-Jewish area, and this woman has this beautiful stuff coming out of her mouth, right? So it's like, wow. Well, what happens is Jesus is going to travel from Tyre and Sidon, and they're right at the top of the map up there, kind of by the legend. Yeah, Tyre and Sidon. So he was up there, and now he's going to come back down to the purple or the magenta area, Decapolis, yeah. And so he's going to come to that area in the story where we're going to pick it up today, right? And then there's, well, and if you look at Magdala, it's on the other side of the sea there from the purple. Nope, go up and to the right. Perfect. Magdala right there. So that's the other spot on the map. Interesting to note, that area where he's got Galilee and he's kind of doing the circle. So that's the Israel side. And on the other side, even back then, not so much Israel, right? This is Gentile area. And so now we see Jesus going to this Decapolis, which it's a Gentile area, right? And he's been there before, and we're going to dive in and look at that. But before we do, you can get rid of the map now. Does that all make sense? Kind of a little geography? Because it's important, because Jesus, when he was up in Tyre and Sidon talking to the woman, he said, hey, you know what? I'm only here for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And yet here he was talking to a non-Gentile, or to a Gentile, to a non-Jew. And now we see that he travels down to this Gentile region again. So it's very compelling of what's going on. So before we get started, let's pray. Father, we ask that you meet us here as we jump into your word and just look at how you interacted with people on this planet when you were here visiting us on this planet. And Lord, as we study it, we just pray you'd open our hearts to what it is you'd have for us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so Jesus had been up Tyre and Sidon, and now he's going to come down to this area of Decapolis. And you might think, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. And in fact, it is. This is Jesus' second visit to this area of Decapolis. And we're going to look at that in a minute. But let's jump in here at Matthew 15, verse 29. And it says, Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee. Last time we talked about the fact that if you wanted to go somewhere, you had to walk or ride a beast of burden. But it was actually required effort, days. Right? So he's been on the road for days, and he shows up at this place. And as we read it here in Matthew, it says he walked beside the Sea of Galilee, and he went up on the mountain and sat down there. So he comes to this spot, and he sits down on the mountain. Well, Matthew doesn't give us a lot of detail on which part of the Sea of Galilee he was at. Well, we're going to look at Mark 7:31. And this is the same event, but Mark gives us a little more detail that I think is going to be helpful. And in Mark 7:31 he says, then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. Okay, so Mark points out that he went to the Decapolis, which is that Gentile area on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. All right, so we know he's in a non-Gentile region. And as I said before, you're probably thinking, wait, something about this sounds familiar. Well, yes, it does sound familiar. And the reason it sounds familiar is back in Matthew 8:28. And this should ring a bell here for you. It says, So we've backed up chapter 8, and it says, "And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him, coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way." Oh, last time Jesus was here, it was when he was dealing with the demon-possessed man. Ringing a bell? Yeah, oh yeah. And what had happened was he has this interaction with the demon-possessed man, and actually there was 2, but one was more notable than the other. And what happens is kind of an interesting take on what was going on, and we had talked about demon theory and where actually demons come from and what that's all about. But needless to say, Jesus talks to this guy, and he ends up, the demons asked to be cast into the pigs, remember? Right? And then the pigs ran down the hill into the Sea of Galilee, and they drowned. Ringing a bell? Excellent. Okay. Well, the people of that region are kind of freaked out, right? Because guess what happened? The economy just crashed, right? They were pig farmers, and 2,000 pigs are rushed down the hill, and now the economy is just tanked, right? They're probably like, oh, what are we going to do? The economy's tanked. And so they're like, hey, Jesus, we'd like you to leave. I mean, that's what they said. They're like, yeah, we're not into whatever you're selling, we're not into. And they said, Jesus, we want you to leave. And here's the great thing about Jesus. You know what he says? Okay. Right? And there's a lot of personal understanding in that in our own lives, right? You can say, hey, Jesus, I don't want you here. Jesus like, okay. Okay, but guess what? Jesus is going to visit again. And what had happened, and we're going to see a dramatic change from the first time he showed up with the demon-possessed guy and the crashed economy and please leave. And when he shows up this time, it is dramatic. And we might ask ourselves, what was the dramatic change? How did it change? Why did it change? What happened? Well, we're going to go to Mark chapter 5, verse 17. In this passage is referring back to the story of the demoniac when they asked him to leave. Now check this out. It says, and this is after the pigs have run down the hill and the people asked Jesus to leave. He says, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged that he might be with him. So Jesus is like, okay, I'm getting in the boat, going to leave. And the guy who's had all these demons cast out is like, hey, I want to join. Right? And we look at this, we're like, that sounds pretty good, right? This sounds pretty solid. Jesus cast a bunch of demons out of this guy, and he's like, Jesus, I want to go with you and learn. Check this out. It says, and he did not permit him, but said to him, Jesus is like, no, don't want you to follow me. I want you to go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Right? So Jesus is saying, hey, look, I know you want to go with me, but guess what? I need you to go tell the people what God has done in your life. Now let's think about this guy. We don't know a lot about him. We know he's a Gentile. Okay? We know that he had demons, and we know that Jesus showed up and cast them out. With all certainty, I will say that everybody in this room has more theological understanding than this man at this point. Right? It's not like he studied the scriptures a lot. We can probably be pretty sure about that. However, he does know what God has done in his own life. Right? And that's what Jesus says. He says, hey, go home and tell your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis, right? Oh, it's the whole area, the Decapolis, how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. And as we look at that, it's, I believe, and there's a lot of agreement in this, that the change that's happened, Jesus is now, and the time frame, we're looking at a year to 15 months has transpired from when Jesus came the first time, cast the demons out, they asked him to leave, so a year has passed, and he's come back. And now, as we dive into this, let's remember, last time he was here, he was asked to leave. So, verse 30. Now we're back to Matthew 15, verse 30. Jesus comes, he walks, says he walked from Tyre and Sidon. He comes up to the hill and he sits down, and it says, and great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they put him at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. So, what's going on? Last time, hit the road, we don't want you. You're bad for the economy. And this time, crowds gather, right? Crowds gather, and they bring their lame. They're crippled, the mute, right? You get the picture. They're bringing people that are hurting, and they bring them to Jesus, and Jesus heals them. The only thing that's happened in that last year was a guy went around and simply told the good things God had done for him. Right? Just this morning I was talking with a sister, and she was telling me about all the great things God has done in her life. And here's the thing, you can't really argue about it, right? You can't, and it's incredible because think about it. Here's this guy, he comes up and he's like, hey, I was demon possessed, and like people hated me, right? I was an obnoxious person to be around, and I was chained up all the time. And this guy shows up, and he casts the demons out, and I'm a changed man. And the people are like, hey, actually, we know you're a changed man because we know what you used to be like. And what happens is you really can't be challenged in that. You can't say, well, theologically. He's like, I don't know much about theology, but I do know what God has done in my heart. And he's changed me, right? He's taken out the evil, and I'm grateful for what he's done. So this guy for a year goes around telling people that, and then Jesus shows up. Guess what happens? Apparently the people are like, I need to know a little bit more about this guy, right? I need to know a little bit more. And so he heals them. And I love the last part of 31. It says, and they glorified the God of Israel. So yeah, this is a Gentile area, right? Because if it was a Jewish area, they'd simply say they glorified God. But we see here Matthew makes point of the fact that it says they glorified the God of Israel, right? Jesus is here, and he's healing these people, and they're like, wow. Now, this next part is just as amazing as the first section of this, because it says, so he's there and healing these people. Now, check it out in verse 32. It says, then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, so this is all part of the same event. He says, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I am unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And his disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? Let's stop there. So here we've learned that these people that once told Jesus to leave have been hanging out with him for 3 days, and they haven't had anything to eat. And so they're so seeking God that they're willing to not even eat. And now it's been 3 days, and it's a desolate place. Now, as you're sitting there, you might say, wait a minute, this sounds familiar, right? I think I know how this goes, right? Because not long ago, a couple of chapters ago, we saw Jesus feed 5,000. Remember? Yeah. Well, and that's something that I've always been like, why? What's the deal? It seems like, right, if I'm one of the disciples, like, oh, ask me, because I know the answer. I've seen this happen before. So what's going on here? Why aren't the disciples jumping in here and saying, oh, I got an idea, let's feed the multitudes? Well, remember, when he fed the 5,000, he was on the west side of the lake. And that's Israel, okay? So that's the people that Jesus came to, right? The lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's come to them. Well, now we're on the other side. And now we've got these Gentiles, right? Well, after the first day, because in the feeding of the 5,000, it was after the first day that Jesus did the miracle, okay? So now the Gentile side, the Jewish disciples are watching this all go down, and I imagine they're like, well, he's going to feed them, right? Oh, nothing happened. And something to think about is in this time, in this place, they didn't have the Burger King and the McDonald's and the Wendy's and all that stuff on every corner. So when you travel, you're a little bit like a Boy Scout, have your day pack with at least a little bit of food and substance in there. So probably the first day, they were okay, right? But they certainly been a couple of days without food. And what Jesus is getting at, he's like, okay, well, it's time. He's unwilling to send them away hungry. And my guess, the disciples are like, well, he's not going to feed these guys because they're Gentiles, right? They're not part of the in crowd. And the reason I think that that's the way they're thinking is because we saw this happen previously, right? They've seen it happen. And we're going to see here in a little bit that they still don't get this. But Jesus says to them, verse 34, and he said to them, how many loaves do you have? So he's doing what have we got? Right? What do we have? And so you go through the crowd like, hey, anybody got any fish or bread? And he says, they said 7 and a few small fish. So similar, right? Fish and loaves, kind of well, that's just what you had. You may not like fish, but it's what you got. So he says, verse 35, and directing the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. So we see Jesus is like, no, the Gentiles are going to have a part of this miracle as well. And so he takes and he breaks the fish and the loaves, and he has the disciples distribute it. And I think it's important to note that the disciples were involved in this miracle, right? Jesus could have you ever think about this? At least I thought about it this way. I suppose God could have just filled their bellies miraculously, right? You'd be sitting there, I'm all hungry, and then all of a sudden, right? Right? You ever dieting, right? And you're like, boy, I wish that miracle would happen, right? Like, But Jesus doesn't do it that way. He involves the disciples. And a lot of times, that's how things happen here, right? That God is doing a miracle, but you and I end up getting involved in it, right? We're the kind of the hands, we're the distribution system for the king. We have a part in it. And so they distribute it. Verse 37, it says, and they all ate and were satisfied. The word they're satisfied is they were filled up. Right? It's like, topped off. Okay, it's like men's breakfast when the coffee cake shows up, right? You eat that until it's just topped off. You're like, oh, I'm so satisfied. The same kind of thing. It wasn't like they, had a little bit, not close enough. No, it says they were satisfied. And there's, I think, spiritual implications there, right? When we come to Jesus, he satisfies us. Okay? We get satisfied. And it says, and they took up 7 baskets full of broken pieces left over. And so we see this miracle. Disciples are involved. Everybody eats and they're satisfied. And then there's leftovers. And the leftovers don't go to waste. Different. It's interesting, if you're into this stuff, different baskets are used, right? Different numbers of leftovers are recovered. And these are bigger baskets, but there's only 7, and 7 is, in biblical numerology, 7 is the number of perfection, completion, perfection. Verse 38, it says, those who ate were 4,000 men, besides the women and children. And after sending away the crowds, he got into a boat and went to the region of Magadan, or Magdala. Right? And we looked at that on the map. And you might say, Magdala, that sounds familiar. Yeah, this is the area that Mary was from. Mary Magdalene was from Magdala. And you'd be like, that's kind of weird. Why is she Mary Magdalene? Well, if you've read the New Testament at all, there's a whole bunch of Marys, right? And they get confused. Well, I get them confused, right? So if you can say, oh, that's the Mary from Magdala, it makes sense. I used to work at this electronics assembly place before the mill, and I worked there, and there was a bunch of Sherrys, okay? And there was a Sherry who was called Sherry Camaro, okay? And so when I'd be talking to Sharon, I'd be like, oh, Sherry at work. She's like, which Sherry? I'm like, the one with the Camaro. So she became Sherry Camaro. She had a green Chevy Camaro, Sherry Camaro. So that kind of makes sense, that people get their names based on stuff you can relate to. Makes sense. All right, so chapter 16, it says, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to test him. They asked to show a sign from heaven. So, the Sadducees and Pharisees probably weren't involved in the last 2 stories at all. Right? They're not going to be over in Gentile land. And so they show up. And remember, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are actually rivals. They don't agree on much. However, they agree on their disdain for Jesus. So I guess that's one thing Jesus did to help the Pharisees and Sadducees. He helped bring them together. And they came and they asked them to show them a sign from heaven. So it's interesting. Up to this point, we've seen Jesus do miracle after miracle after miracle, and yet they're still asking for a sign. If we look in Matthew 12:38, while he's put that up, I'll explain where I'm headed. This isn't the first time they've asked for a sign. It may sound familiar that, Sadducees and Pharisees show up and they're like, hey, show us a sign. And so here in Matthew 12:38, it says, then some scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, an evil and adulterous generation seek for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So it's not the first time we've heard the Sadducees and the Pharisees ask for some kind of sign. This time they asked for a sign from heaven. And it's significant that they asked? Let me explain the significance of why they asked for a sign from heaven. They believed that when a sign was from heaven, it was from God, like fire, call fire down from heaven, because you think back to Moses when he was in Egypt performing some of the miracles, right? Some of the soothsayers of the time were able to duplicate some of the miracles that Moses did, right? So the Pharisees are like, Pharisees and Sadducees, well, if it's a miracle from heaven, then we know it's from the heavens, then we know it's from God. So that's why they're asking about this miracle from heaven. And Jesus says, verse 2 of Matthew 16, he says, he answered, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. But in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. So he left them and departed. So here we see, he says, you guys can interpret the condition of the weather based on the color of the sky. And so the theory is that, and we still have that one, was it red skies at night, sailors delight, red skies in the morning, the sailors take warning. And so they were proud of the fact that they could understand by looking at the weather, right? Today it's changed a little bit because we'll get online and we'll look at the Doppler radar. Okay, and here the thought is in the morning, if you see a red sky, prevailing winds coming from the east, if you see a red sky, that means the sun's coming through the clouds, and if the wind's blowing from the east towards you, then the storm is coming, right? But if it's in the evening and you see the clouds, well, that means the wind has blown the storm past you, and so when you see the sun shining through the clouds at that acute angle that makes it red, oh, well, it's going to be a good day tomorrow because the storm has already passed us. And Jesus is saying, well, you look at that stuff, but yet you don't see what's happening here right now. Remember when John the Baptist was in prison, and John the Baptist sent his disciples over, and they said, hey, John's asking, are you the one? And what did Jesus tell him? He says, well, look at what you're seeing, right? You're seeing the lame healed and the good news preached, right? And he talked about all the things that he was doing. He didn't out and out just say yes. Basically, he said, tell them what you've been seeing happen. And that's what Jesus is getting at here with the Pharisees. He's like, hey, look, y'all need to look at what's going on. Here's Jesus, and he's doing all these things according to the scripture, and you should be able to pick up on it, but they're not. In fact, he goes on and he says, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but none will be given except that, and this is what he told them last time, except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. Verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Okay, so let's think about this. This is more of that bread stuff. It comes up a lot. And this is a very interesting story to me. Let's look at it. And Jesus said to them, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So we've just had two events happen. One of them involved bread, right? And one of them involved the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Okay, so right after this, he's going to the other side of the lake. And it says, verse 7, and they began to discuss among themselves, saying, we brought no bread. Right? So they're sitting there, and Jesus continuing the teaching. And it's, for me, noteworthy that Jesus is not concerned with their physical well-being as much as he is concerned about their spiritual well-being. And that's the way it is, that when God works on our lives, it's not necessarily solely our physical well-being. It's important. God cares. However, he cares more about our spiritual well-being, right? Because that's the part that's eternal. And so the disciples hear Jesus say, beware the leaven of the Sadducees and Pharisees. And immediately, they're going to go for the literal interpretation, right? He must literally be talking about bread. That's what they're doing, right? They're literally, oh yeah, it's about the bread. And you got to wonder, what was Jesus thinking in the boat as he, hears them talking about, oh, we need more bread. It says, verse 8, but Jesus, aware of this, said, "O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you do not have bread? Do you yet perceive? Do you not remember the five loaves and the five loaves and the 5,000, and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves and the 4,000, and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So Jesus, he's like, okay, one more time. Okay? You're right, you don't have bread. But you got to remember that I fed 5,000 men, right? Remember, there's women and children too, and 4,000 men, women and children too, and you guys are sitting here worried about the bread, okay? And then he goes on and he repeats it. This time he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And I love this, verse 12, okay? Then they understood that he did not tell them to be aware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So finally, after he, kind of, shakes them up a little bit, it's like, hey, look, it's not about the fact you don't have any bread. It's about something else. And then they're able to be like, oh, got it. Leaven. And it goes back to the parables that we looked at. Remember the leaven as it grows? That, there's stuff you got to be leery of. And so they finally realize that. So we're going to stop there. The guys can start passing out the elements for communion. But next week, I'm pretty excited about. It's a big deal.